Today's topic is Miners Take a Look at Mining. Our presenters are Bob Tammen, a steelworker and IBEW retired, and Mike Maleska, who is a retired Taconite miner and union representatives. They are two insiders who will give us a boots-on-the-ground look at mining in Minnesota. They'll be covering a variety of topics that will include the economics and employment numbers and the reality of weak environmental laws that legally allow a permitted mine to impair a popular downstream lake. We're really glad to have you with us.
Thank you. I'll dive in. I'm Bob Tammen. My wife, Pat, and I live in Soudan, Minnesota, home of Minnesota's first iron mine. I started working in the mines in the late 60s. I worked for direct employment for U.S. Steel for a few years, and I quit and went to work for contractors doing electrical work, right back into U.S. Steel's plant for an expansion. After that, I ended up at Reserve Mining Company on Lake Superior. You know, they were dumping their taconite tailings into Lake Superior, and we modified that so those tailings went up to milepost 7. I also worked in Upper Michigan, North Dakota, Wyoming, several western states, some mining. In my later years, I worked for utilities, installing windmills in southwestern Minnesota. So I've seen a lot of Minnesota. I'd like to kind of set the tone for my talk with a quote from Wendell Berry. You know, Wendell Berry was a poet, philosopher, author, small farmer. And, you know, Wendell Berry said, "What I stand for is what I stand on." And I think most of us would agree with that. And we're told we should think globally and act locally. Globally, I don't think we're doing real well. We've got coal companies mining coal at record levels. We got oil companies pumping oil at record levels, still taking that carbon out of the ground. And so what do we got here in Minnesota? We got carbon sequestered in our wetlands. And so when I say we ought to stand for it, we stand on, we have to protect our wetlands, and we're having some little victories here in northern Minnesota. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to focus on economics a little bit. You know, most of the time we're rightfully concerned about the technicalities of protecting our environment. And when the mining promoters come along, they talk about the great contribution to Minnesota's economy from mining, all the jobs produced. And so I've gone looking for the numbers. What are the numbers in Minnesota for the economic activity generated and the number of mining jobs? And I try to get good numbers. And so I'm going to start out with gross domestic product. Now, the Department of Commerce, Bureau of Economic Analysis at the federal level, they gather numbers all the time on our economy. They publish them every quarter. How big is the American economy? Well, they also break down those numbers by state and by industry. If you have the patience of a saint, you can go online to that website and you can find how big Minnesota's economy is. You can find what Minnesota mining contributes to that economy. And so for the previous year, the numbers come out at the end of the next quarter. So the 2023 numbers came out the first part of April, after January, February, March. And so I got numbers from the first part of April. It showed that Minnesota's economy is $471 billion. We got a good-sized economy. And then they show what mining contributes to that economy. They put mining, quarrying, oil, and gas together, but it's mostly mining, those jobs. So it shows that mining contributes $1.586 billion. So our total economy, $471 billion, mining, $1.5 billion. I divided it out, percentage, it's 0.336%. mining is 1/3% of Minnesota's economy. If you round it off to the nearest whole number, it's 0. So mining, no matter what the promoters say, mining is a very small part of a healthy Minnesota economy. The other talking point we hear consistently is the importance of jobs from mining. We have some numbers for that. For that, I go to the state of Minnesota's website, Department of Employment and Economic Development. They call it DEED. And the title of the website is Current Employment Statistics. Minnesota has a lot of jobs. Total non-farm jobs, 2,974,000 jobs. So we have almost 3 million jobs in the state of Minnesota. You go down the list, you come to mining and logging. They run logging in with mining. I don't know why. I'm going to try and break them out for you a little later. But the total of mining and logging together from the state of Minnesota is 6,491 jobs. Now, I didn't have to figure out the percentage for that one because they have a column with the percent. It says that mining and logging are 0.2% of Minnesota's employment. We have 6 operating taconite plants in northern Minnesota, and actually they are providing less than 4,000 jobs. So as it stands now, mining contributes very little to the jobs in Minnesota. I know a few weeks ago, I heard somebody joke that a modern mining operation is 4 robots and a secretary. Now, it's not quite that bad yet, but I'm old enough to remember when we had roughly 14,000 miners employed in Minnesota. And now, direct employment is less than 4,000. And they're still producing almost the same amount of ore. So they've managed to automate away 10,000 jobs. So as we look at the mining industry to provide economic welfare and jobs for the state of Minnesota, I don't think that we can rationally expect much along those lines. Now, I try to document the numbers I give to you that they're dependable. If anybody hears me say something that they don't believe is accurate, I hope they'll get back to me immediately. I like to be accurate. One of the places I go to get numbers on mining is Minnesota's Mining Tax Guide. It's put out by Minnesota Department of Revenue. Every year they publish one. This one is for the year 2023, and this comes out in October. So it's roughly half a year old. It's reasonably accurate. And they list the mining companies, and I'll just run through them for you, give you a feel for the mining operations in northern Minnesota right now. We've got Minorca, Hibbing Taconite, North Shore, U.S. Steel, Keewatin Taconite, U.S. Steel, Mintac, and United Taconite. Now, the ownership is mainly with U.S. Steel and Cleveland Cliffs. So we have 6 operating taconite plants. This mining tax guide says that the total direct employment this year is 3,770. It was a little more last year. Now, some of these mines shut down temporarily. I think Cleveland Cliffs shut down reserve for a little while for whatever reason. I think they were squabbling with the people that were getting the income from those mines. But anyhow, we have 6 operating taconite plants and fewer than 4,000 jobs. Another little bit of information that came out of this mining tax guide is the term percentage of depletion. Now, I've heard that term used in conjunction with oil operations where they're pumping oil so the company gets to take a deduction because they're depleting their natural resources. Well, apparently Minnesota has the same thing. It's a taxable deduction for a wasting asset. And I like the fact that they use the term wasting asset. And I think of it in those terms. They're wasting our natural resources, shipping them out of state and leaving us with the degraded water. So anyhow, that leaves you with the feel for what economically mining is doing for Minnesota. It's not much income. It's not many jobs. It's a threat to our natural resources. And as far as needing green energy, they like to talk about being carbon neutral. Well, if you go online and just Google carbon credit criminality, you'll get a bunch of stories about people buying and selling carbon credits to claim that they're producing green energy, and they buy these carbon credits like pork belly futures. It's just a disgrace. So I guess the point I'm trying to bring out with these numbers for you is that I believe that at the state level in Minnesota, mining is culturally important and economically irrelevant. That's what we're stuck with. And so I'll close with the statement I opened with. What I stand for is what I stand on, and I hope we'll all do that. Thank you.
My name is Mike Maleska, and just to start out, if there's anybody out there that wants to dismiss what I have to say, maybe this will be enough for you. I lean pretty far left politically. You can dismiss me as a fat old bearded tree hugger if you like. I'm no scientist, chemist, or metallurgist. I have no college degree in anything. My life is fairly unremarkable. But today I've been given a chance to bring my 40 plus years of mining experience to the conversation and how those experiences relate with respect to the sulfide ore, copper, and nickel mining debate. If you're still here, my contribution goes kind of like this. My late father grew up in a rural agricultural area now known as Friedenberg Township, which lies by Fish Lake about 15 miles northwest of the Duluth Airport. That was a predominantly Polish immigrant agricultural area where the second generation was already at work pulling stumps, building roads, churches, farming, and all the regular necessities of a hard-scrabble life on the land. He told of a crew of men operating a portable drill rig that worked the area when he was a kid. And this was about 90 years ago. They pulled their rig from landowner to landowner, offering $5 per hole to see what's down there. That was pretty big money. Farmers wanted lots of holes. Not all farmers, however, were interested in that. My grandpa didn't like the idea of selling out his land to any mining company. You should understand this. At that time, landowners had what's known as mineral rights. The assumption is that those rights extended from their property lines to the center of the earth. When Grandpa escorted them off his property, they confirmed their intent by saying to him, "I hope you like living on an island." If you need an explanation of what that means, it means that they represented a company that intended to mine every piece of property in the area, and that if his wasn't mined, it would be left standing alone as a pedestal in a vast mine pit. These were early copper-nickel explorations, and that wasn't the end of them. The mining companies gathered forces in the Minnesota legislature with respect to mineral rights and won. If you were to purchase land in northeastern Minnesota today, you would not be purchasing the mineral rights. The state asserted control of mineral rights in Cook, Lake, and St. Louis counties when iron ore was discovered. This process of capturing mineral rights began as early as 1889. Minnesota owns by far the most mineral rights of any state in the nation. Currently at about 1/4 of Minnesota's surface area is mineral rights controlled. And I asked to have a link put in the chat, I believe, regarding mineral rights ownership in Minnesota. You can refer to that too. As you can see, this copper-nickel pursuit is not in its bright-eyed, rosy-cheeked, fresh beginnings. Mining exploiters have been working the room for over 150 years, and they know what they're doing. As a side note, I have a problem with any government entity marketing natural resources. I also have a problem with the inclusion of iron, copper, or any finite metallurgical material to even be considered as a natural resource, as it cannot be regrown or replaced and is indeed finite in supply. When it's gone, it's gone. Those are my two little issues, but I'll continue. The mining companies know this well, and that is why their magic is in describing the glory of the short-term benefits to us humans who are at the mercy of market-based economies and the teeter-totter of global demand for minerals. I was fortunate to have also grown up in a rural area, but this area was the Iron Range, where agriculture had been getting squeezed and pushed around by mining companies with their need for surface area to store their overburden. For those who don't know, that means the topsoil and rock that lies above the mineral-bearing ore. These are open-pit mines here, narrowest at the bottom and ever widening at the top. And depending on the depth of the ore body, dump piles can get very high and very wide. That's in miles. My family was a 2 parents and 7 kids arrangement. We must have made 50 trips into the Boundary Waters canoe area over the decades, canoed many of the region's rivers, harvested wild rice everywhere from the Vermilion and Shannon rivers, Big Rice Lake to Ball Club and Mississippi rivers, all the way down to Big Sandy and Round Lakes in Aiken County. Most of us were and are woodsy, avid hunters, gatherers, and fisher people, and we are miners. Iron ore mining has served northeastern Minnesota well. We won 2 world wars and yet managed to construct a system of environmental laws that we believed protected our families, communities, and beloved outdoors from harm due to mining discharges. But our vigilance drifted, and the mining companies never sleep. When demand for iron ore dipped, things got hard on the Iron Range. When demand rose, life's hardships eased a bit. Iron Range economic depressions lagged national trends due to the drawn-out nature of the steel industry. But when iron went global in the 1980s, those dips really started to hurt. When the mining companies needed favors, our communities had begun to acquiesce. To get a shuttled mine back up and running takes big money. It also requires a skilled workforce. You can't just wave your magic wand and poof, a millwright or an electrician appears. You need to retain at least a minimal number of those people in the area. So we fiddled around with the unemployment laws to keep people in the area. That is a mining company win. When the furnace stacks at the mine processing plants were found to be loaded with toxins, we collaborated with the legislature and environmental agencies to find money for the mining companies to upgrade their processes and instrumentation to diagnose and clean up stack emissions. Perfect? Hell no. Mining company win? Hell yes. When a mining company was discovered to have allowed a vendor to build a huge repair shop on an adjacent piece of land to steal the mechanical repair work from the mine mechanics, and a deplorable scene where grease, oils, and fluids were often dumped directly on the ground and into the creek, the union took the company to task and won. Mining company win? To be determined. The union won back the work, but the swill went into the creek to Hay Lake, Swung Lake, and on to the Mississippi River. When a mining company was discovered to have been discharging foul mining effluent into a trout stream, residents took up the cry to have the discharges stopped. Mining company win? This one gets ugly. Mining companies have long been trying to get the environmental laws weakened. As the iron ore economy gushes and stalls, the citizenry has grown more apologetic towards the mining companies with respect to observance of strict mining company environmental compliance. In plain words, we're now more okay with looking the other way than we've ever been since we began regulating mining. Schools, hospitals, everything start to shut down when mining is slowed or halted. In the process, the communities and citizens become even more skeptical of environmental and other constraints on the mines. Local legislators, mayors, city councilors, realtors, the entire network of this capitalistic economic engine support progress in mining, regardless of the environmental realities and the history of the mines, always finding a way of getting what they want through pressing those same politicians and agencies. In the meantime, things change. Count me as among those who believed our environmental protections were sufficient to protect Minnesota's famously abundant and clean waters. I was wrong. After I retired in 2019, I joined Bob Tammen and a scientific study group as a casual volunteer water sampler. I needed to see for myself where the noise was coming from with respect to mine runoff. We took water samples from Langley Creek, Embarrass River, Dunker River, Spring Mine Creek, and others in the Babbitt area. Other volunteers gathered samples in connected and unconnected waters adjacent to these streams. Some made multi-day trips into the boundary waters to collect those samples, all under strict chain of command rules, such as keeping the samples on ice from their source all the way to the laboratory. I'm proud to say it's my very own initials on some of the data in the MPCA's logged samples, just like Bob's, taken from a few of these waters. Since then, Birch Lake, downstream from the Peter Mitchell mine near Babbitt, has been declared impaired. That was back in December last year, due to the fouled waters of Dunker River and Langley Creek draining into Bob Bay there. This is not a sporadic event. Every moment of every hour of every day, these streams are depositing sulfate into Birch Lake on the north side of the Continental Divide, continuing north to the Rainy River, and this is just one site. There are many mine dumps in the area. During my 42-year stint as a taconite, that's a low-grade iron ore miner, I enjoyed the protection of a union to allow me to voice concerns. In the 1990s and early 2000s, my union joined with the mining companies to protect the steel industry in the United States from foreign dumping. My voice was added to urgent calls for labor issues and community wellness. I utilized state money to further my education to become an industrial electrician. All these are mining company wins. The mining companies have the support of governmental agencies, communities, politicians, labor, and even those of us collecting these damn samples. Mining company wins, right? Yes. What I've described so far, issues regarding these are mines that are or were legally permitted to operate, and they're either retired or still operating. So this is all permitted stuff. Thus, the mining companies producing those discharges may not be liable for the cleanup. Then how come we can't be taken seriously when we are pointing out that the Clean Water Act will soon be taking charge of the cleanup and monitoring of Birch Lake, its tributaries and downstream flows? How come some people dismiss our arguments as too extreme when we show proof that mining discharges have killed wild rice? And why is it so hard for people to understand that wild rice is the only life form that we're using to demonstrate the reality of the toxic nature of these emissions? What about the hundreds or maybe thousands of other microorganisms that are rubbed out or crippled by the sulfide deposits and ensuing mercury methylation taking place in the water and soils under those waters? You'll hear people claim bottled water has more sulfide in it than lake water. That is meant to be dismissive of the issue. There are dozens of similar arguments designed to minimize or destroy our warnings. If you ever get near Hibbing, call a high school administrator and let them know you want to have a look inside that school. Pay particular attention to the brass, and brick, and marble, and ancient woods and materials used to build it. It's enormous. It's fascinating. You absolutely must see the high school library and the auditorium where Bob Dylan played. The mining companies built this. We moved U.S. Highway 53 between Evelyn and Virginia to allow for mine expansion. Be sure to see the Tom Rukavina Bridge there. We did that with the Minnesota DOT because the mining company needed it. Massive power lines stretch across the landscape. You think some mining company executive reached into his pocket to buy those rights away and build those lines? We have a 900 plus megawatt power plant that serves only industry here. We can do all these damn things for the mining companies. We find a way. But for some reason, we do not have the will to force these foreign copper nickel companies to stay the hell away from this priceless, unique, wet wilderness unless they can do their business without poisoning our air and water. Iron Rangers are clamoring for an entirely new type of mining that's never before been done without polluting in the most pristine part of the most pristine state in the USA. I don't know why. Thanks.
That was a powerful talk both of you gave. Shall we move on to some questions? Let's see. Suzanne has a question. She tabled for Tamarack Water Alliance with two scientists who shared the serious methylmercury amounts in Birch Lake, the one entry point to boundary waters, and explained the water samples must come from the bottom. Could you explain the relationship between sulfuric acid and methylmercury?
I think there's some science that indicates that sulfates methylate mercury at fairly low levels of sulfate. So even though they solved the wild rice problem, they still face a methylation problem. And there again is complicated chemistry. How do you explain to the public the methylation process? Because you get a scientist going at it, they'll say, well, it's methylating, then it's demethylating. And so you have to wade through some complicated chemistry. And I see the question, did you check water samples from the bottom? I think normally we're doing grab samples right from the surface. I have a little sampling pipe. It's about 18 inches long. You can drop it to the bottom. You yank the little rope, and it grabs that sample from the bottom. And I went into Bob Bay. That's right downstream from the Dunca site. The Dunca site is where the copper nickel formation laid on top of the taconite, the Duluth formation. And so that was waste rock 50 years ago. They just piled it up. So as soon as air and water hit it, you had heavy metals going into Bob Bay of Birch Lake. And I saw a report from, I believe, the DNR that there was a layer of mineralized water on the bottom of Bob Bay. So out of curiosity, I took my sample grabber out there, I think it was the year before last, and I grabbed a sample off the bottom. But of course, all I'm checking is conductivity. And the conductivity was the same all the way through, but that's a shallow bay. Bob Bay, where that polluted water is coming into, is, I think at the most, maybe 8 foot deep. So normally it'll be mixed up pretty good. So anyhow, in the answer to that question, normally we're doing surface samples, we're doing grab samples. And, with Mike and I going out on those sampling expeditions, we're chipping in to pay for that. It's not a tremendous amount of money, but if you want to check sulfates, it's, I think, $20 a sample. So you go out on the weekend, you're grabbing a lot of samples. And so there is a little cost to going through the whole water column and grabbing samples. And I'd like to, being I've got the microphone here, I'd like to say that I appreciate Mike's input. I was a union member most of my life. Well, Mike was a union leader for a while. And so, he's out there in front taking a little heat from his fellow union members for speaking up for clean water. A lot of them, even though they agree with us, they hesitate to take a little bit of verbal abuse. And if we're going to protect our clean water, we have to be willing to step up there and do what we have to do.
Thank you for that explanation and strong comment. I think the Ojibwe elder Ricky Defoe in last month's talked about connecting with warrior energy. I found that so empowering myself. We have another question. Are mining communities economically better off than surrounding non-mining communities? What's your opinion about that?
I'll try that one, Bob. I don't know how you would make that comparison because the communities here are here primarily because of the originality of the iron ore that was here. I would say we had logging here for a century and a half, maybe more. Mining has been here for about 150 years. These communities sprang up where to say better off, I don't know, it's kind of a comparable word, but that's why these communities landed where they did. In fact, the community of Hibbing was moved because of mining. Just to give you an idea. But I really don't know how to answer that one any better than possibly. But that's kind of what part of my presentation was as well. We've been sold the glory, even though it's short term, as any finite resource would be. The splash is here now for whatever it is. It's 100 years, 150 years. And when that's depleted, we'll be doing some other things here. So it's kind of hard question to answer.
You know, I'd probably have a little input from some experience I had. I helped build Hibbing Taconite in, I believe it was around 74. I believe that was a construction and probably started up in 75. You know, Hibbing's a mining town. And perhaps some of you have heard of Aaron Brown. He's a great journalist. And he published some statistics that Hibbing now has more people working in healthcare than they do working in the mines. And, you know, my wife, Pat, picked up that virus a month ago. And so I believe she was in the hospital in Duluth for a while getting restored. And I'm visiting with the nurses. And one of the nurses is a union member. She's a steel worker. And so in my younger days, I've always been a union member. And so you think about mining and you think about steel workers. Well, the steel workers have adapted the right way our communities are adapted. The steel workers are organizing the nurses. Hibbing has more healthcare employees than they have miners. And so regardless of what we do, our economy is evolving. And I think what we want to do as our economy is evolving, we want to be part of that evolution, that we don't let them run wild in our wetlands for more mining projects that are going to create very few jobs, and let the natural progression of our economy, if we're going with healthcare, let's go with healthcare. And of course, being I'm an octogenarian, I think we should have excellent healthcare. But anyhow, that's my personal position on it. But anyhow, the steel workers are organizing nurses. They've adapted to the times, and I think we all should.
Mike, can you speak about the health risks miners and people living in the Hibbing area might experience? I think I heard you speak about that once before.
Yeah, I can speak to that. The mine that I worked at has had a chronic dust problem. They all do. And I don't know why this one is being singled out as being so dramatic, but the dust in one of the primary buildings out here, crusher building, was so furious that the health department, which would have been MSHA and also the St. Louis County mine inspectors, took action. They said, next time this crusher is running, we don't want any workers in there, which kind of bothered the company. They got to have workers to operate the plant. So company says, how about if we make them wear dust masks? And the health department said, okay, but they've got to be fit tested. And so they worked it all out where bearded guys and anybody that couldn't pass a seal test on these dust masks had to shave their faces. So that's kind of ridiculous to my way of thinking. You're curing the symptom, not the problem. So the company, to their credit, built a several $100,000 dust collector in there, several $100,000. That didn't do the trick. It couldn't balance the air in there. The dust problem is they're still wearing dust masks out there. And the thing is that this dust has been, it was thought to be causing mesothelioma. In my heart, I think it does. But mesothelioma is specifically comes from asbestos. And when this thing worked its way through the court systems over the last couple of decades, this argument about does silica cause it, the result came out back that silica is asbestos-like fibers. That means it's not asbestos, therefore, no. So that, I don't know what stage of litigation that is at now, but realistically, we bring that dust home, give it to our families. You've got a higher than average rate of breast cancer around here and other kinds of illnesses. Unless you're a Google millionaire, I don't know how you'd ever plan on pursuing that to litigate that to prove that it is or is not. In the meantime, we keep on tramping home with our dusty clothes, giving it to our kids, and I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yes, thank you. Here's another question. Is there any proposed legislation you think would help on any of the issues you've raised?
I'll go, Bob. Yeah. We need to completely revamp. I mean, what I laid out here was poisons that when I was working in the mine, I didn't realize these things were happening. Some of this stuff happened over time, where these effluents were winding up poisoning the wild rice. If you'd have started that 150 years ago, we might have still mined iron ore. But my point is, we need an entire revamp of the environmental laws. People that are telling you that Minnesota is so strong environmentally, that's not true. We don't have the protections for that. We do have a strong culture of let's go get that mineral. And I don't know how you engage the public in the reality that our environmental laws need to be way, way stronger and more specific and more mobile, so you can. We get called anti-miners. I made a 40-some-year career in mining. We're not anti-miners. We are anti-dirty miners. I'll say that for myself. But a complete overhaul of the environmental laws, at least in this area, I think is pretty important.
And we've had some changes in our policies, and I think back to my younger days in the mining. I was doing work. I did electrical work, and I could maybe a little welding. So you're welding on some equipment, and to protect our equipment, we'd throw an asbestos blanket over that equipment. In my younger days, we still used asbestos blankets, and I can still picture that blanket. It looks like a real coarse cotton made out of large threads. Just a blanket, probably 5 by 5 feet square. And you could see the fibers floating off of that. And who gets mesothelioma and who doesn't? I'm in my 80s now, and I've got good lungs, I think. The next person is gone already, because whatever their susceptibility was to asbestos, they got lung cancer. And so we've improved that. We don't use asbestos blankets anymore. And I guess I'll remind people that I started working in the mines over 50 years ago. We were a macho bunch of young men. As a matter of fact, when I started working in the mines, there was not a single woman working there. And maybe the company would say, well, you ought to wear a dust mask. And we thought we were bulletproof. Some of us were, some of us were not. And so our policies over the years have gotten better, but, we're still, the statistics are out there. We have elevated mesothelioma. We have 10% of the babies in the Lake Superior watershed being born with elevated mercury. We still got problems to solve, and we still got a mining industry that's resistant to progressive change.
We have a number of comments in the chat. A lot of thank yous for what you're sharing. There, I think, is a question about how well are your messages received or resonating in the mining community, especially messages coming directly from the mining community. Seems like they'd be very compelling to legislators and the general public. You have a comment about that?
I would comment that, go ahead, Mike.
I've had guys, when I had a 40-some-year career in iron ore mining, and this copper nickel stuff came up, and I started making comments against it and how come. I literally had guys pecking me in the chest like this, saying, "You're denying my grandchildren a livelihood." That's how deep this goes. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I get a little negative feedback from time to time, and Sudan is a mining community. Some of the old miners, there's probably still a few people that might have worked in the Sudan underground mine. They're about all gone. But we're on pretty good terms with our neighbors. I kind of know they're not in total agreement, and I think it doesn't hurt that my wife Pat taught in Ely for 30 years. And so before they burn our house down, they probably think, well, Mrs. Tammen taught me 30 years ago. I hate to have her out in the cold. And so we get along with our neighbors pretty good. We're seeing more environmental awareness. It's going to be a continuing battle to try to overcome the mining culture. I pointed out that statistically, very few Minnesotans work in the mines. But if I go look across the street, my neighbor retired from the mines. If I look across the alley behind her house, that neighbor worked in the mines. And so it's still a mining community. It's still a mining culture. You try to bring the numbers out there. I gave you the numbers. Mining is such a tiny part of Minnesota's economy. It's a tiny part of Minnesota's employment. Doesn't create many jobs, but we're still stuck with that culture. And that's why it's not going to be easy for us to protect our wetlands. But I think it makes logical sense for us to protect the area where our carbon is sequestered in Minnesota. Our peatlands are a major sequestration of carbon. And we still have quite a bit of peat in northern Minnesota. We should be careful about destroying any wetlands. They say they'll mitigate any wetlands they destroy. A lot of what that means is they go up there to Koochiching County and buy some farm that was drained 100 years ago, and they plug a few culverts, and they call that mitigation. And so it's really not the kind of mitigation we need. The goal of mitigation is if you destroy wetlands, you want to restore wetlands in the same watershed, and it's difficult. I think in the case of Polymet, you're getting close to 1,000 acres of wetlands. You can't restore 1,000 acres in that watershed. So mining is a poor investment nowadays.
Just a point of information, Bob and Mike. When I was in Emily last year, I talked to the Minnesota Department of Health, and one of the field inspectors informed me that Talon Metals, I don't know how many holes they've drilled in the last 18 years, but they are asking for extensions on sealing their drill holes, their exploratory drill holes. And they're getting those. They're required to seal them within 10 years without a request for an extension. So I'm giving that over to you guys to explore the consequences of that to our precious watershed now and into the future. And in relationship to that, I had a question about the 14,000 or so tons of nickel that's been mined out of Michigan and its relative insignificance economically to Michigan and the world in relationship to the nickel mining that goes on in Canada, Australia, Russia, and mostly there. Thanks.
We should be concerned about drilling holes. You mentioned, Suzanne, that they don't mining. If you and I abandon a well, we have to have somebody qualified plug that well. If a mining company drills an exploration hole, they have 10 years. And as you mentioned, they're applying for extensions. Now, you might have seen the news. What do they got? That helium formation up there by Babbitt. And they were going to drill into it. And they lost their drilling fluid. Poof, it's gone. Oh. And so that drilling fluid went into the formation someplace. You can kind of see behind me in the background, I got my map of the Mesabi Iron Range. And if you get up close to it, you can see a lot of little dotted lines on that map. And those dotted lines are fractures, they're faults. We have a lot of faults in our iron formation. And in the case of that helium exploration, they had a fault big enough, they lost all their drilling fluid, so they went to drilling with air. And what we should be concerned about, we got these people drilling through different aquifers, and they're sitting there for 10 years. Are those aquifers exchanging different levels? Is that water moving? And, the mining companies have a blank check for 10 years, and according to your statement, they want to extend that. And so as I look at my map, all these faults, all these fractures, we shouldn't be pumping crap into our groundwater and have to live with it for generations probably. And for an example, we have the radar base at Finland, Minnesota. At one time, they had a radar base looking for ballistic missiles from Russia or some damn thing. Anyhow, it's close to Lake Superior. And they were using, I think, trichlor to clean the electronic equipment. They're still trying to clean that up. Years and years later, once it gets into our formation, we're stuck with it. So we should be skeptical about miners drilling into our formation and not having to seal their holes immediately like any homeowner would.
There was an earlier question about employees of mining companies. Is it true that the industry jobs are limited only to families in the industry itself? Is it hard for someone outside the industry to get a mining job?
I would say that's not. Back in the old days, that was probably true. That's like Bob referred that there were no women in the mines back in the day. That's not really true anymore. You really they're taking their people out of the colleges. You need to have some sort of either electrical or environmental or mechanical certification in order to get in there. For the most part, no. But I think there probably still is some nepotism, but I think it's mainly reduced.
Thank you. Go ahead.
They'd have knowledge and maybe a little connections, but I didn't have relatives in the mines here. My brother worked in the gold mine in South Dakota, but that was my closest relative.
And then there's a question to both of you. We'd be curiosity about how to know how you are finding inspiration and encouragement to keep up with your very important advocacy work that you're doing. What gives you hope?
My wife and I are clean water people, and I suppose it maybe ties back to the boundary waters. We spend a lot more time in our recliner than we do in a canoe anymore. We're in our 80s. In our younger days, we were all over the boundary waters. My wife was a little bit of an animal. She could carry 10 days of groceries in her pack, and we'd head off. Back when I was in the mines, we pulled shift work. We got off Thursday morning at 8 o'clock and didn't have to go back until Tuesday afternoon at 4. That was a nice long weekend. We'd go off into the boundary waters. And nowadays, I don't understand the shifts modern miners work. I talked to one guy and told him that story that I'd go into the boundary waters, and he says, "Oh, I go to Germany." However long his weekend is, he had time to fly overseas and come back for his next shift. So anyhow, we had some good times.
I'd like to take a crack at that one too, Lynn. My very earliest memories were in a canoe and in the boundary waters, and some of them are pretty cool. But the question was mostly about how do you find the push to the advocacy. This is something that somebody's got to do. And if I do a crappy enough job of it, somebody else will pick up the pace. But realistically, this needs to be done. We need to steer the conversation. My beloved union brothers and sisters that are on the wrong side of this issue right now need to understand these mining companies get what they want, and they can get this too. They can understand that we have an enormous future here if we do this right and don't poison things along the way. That's it's got to be done.
You know, there are miners out there that support us. I remember Pat and I volunteered at the Blueberry Festival in Ely a few years ago, and I had my big map up there, and some of the miners stopped by. A lot of them weren't too agreeable, but one miner was pretty friendly, and turned out that I had worked with his dad. And so he started telling stories. And he said, you know, somebody came out from the plant, this was a few years ago, with some grease barrels and grease rags, and he was running a D8 cat on a waste dump. And the guy from the plant said, bury these barrels. And he says, I can't do that. And the guy says, foreman says, bury it. And so he says, what do you do? Now, I suppose I should be a little careful telling that story. It's hearsay. But, you know, I worked with his dad. I believe his story. We've got waste all over the Iron Range we're going to be living with for generations. It's time for us to start paying attention. I think quite a few of my fellow miners are paying attention. It's a little hostile to speak up, but it's worth the battle.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your courage with us. It's as Shania says, it's a challenging piece to be speaking these truths, but you were right. It absolutely needs to be done. And I'm sure there are other miners who share your concerns and concerns and caring about the world and northern Minnesota. Are there any other additional questions? It's 11 o'clock. I think we'll need to stop. Thank you so much, Mike and Bob.